Hello, everybody. My name is Veli-Matti Kärkkäinen, and I will be sharing this Oxford Interfaith forum for today. And I wish to welcome all of you to listening to an exciting and very interesting presentation to be followed by Q&A. Let me begin by giving a brief introduction to our featured speaker today. Jacob Chengwei Feng is currently a PhD candidate at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. He majors in theological studies with a minor in New Testament, and I'm proud to say that he is my doctoral mentee. He has been a pastor in USA and Singapore after he finished his Master of Theology degree at Fuller in 2012. And currently he is pastoring and giving denominational leadership in Princeton, New Jersey. Jacob was born and raised in China as an atheist. After completing his bachelor's degree in engineering physics from Tsinghua University in Beijing, he came to USA to pursue his PhD degree, not in theology, but in physics at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And there he became a Christian through the Christians on Campus. And after graduating with a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering, he worked for 10 years, guess where? On the Wall Street in New York City. Then, upon God's calling, he resigned from his job and began to serve as full-time pastor in his church. His church affiliation is the local church, or as is also called, Little Flock, founded by Watchman Nee in the 1920s in China. Nowadays, the Little Flock has become a global multi-ethnic and multilingual church community with international fellowship and worldwide missional outreach in Africa, Asia, America, and Europe. Jacob's research interests include systematic theology, Chinese theology, religion and science, ecumenical and interfaith dialogue with world religions, Chinese philosophies, and also modern science, not only in the West, but also in China. He was the recipient of the 2022 Logos Scholarship from Oxford, and also the CATS, the Center for Advanced Theological Studies at Fuller. He has published already, even though he's a PhD student, for example, in the very well-known Zygon Journal of Religion and Science, and also in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society and related, and also in some other journals. So we will first soon hear Jacob's presentation, and thereafter we will have a Q&A session to be followed by closing remarks by Professor Diane Openchain. Diane Openchain hardly needs an introduction. She's one of the world's most well-known and respected experts on all things Chinese, including religion, philosophy, society, everything Chinese. So we couldn't imagine a more respected and more high-level commentator to close and wrap up our session. So Jacob, please, the floor is yours, and we can't wait to hear your remarks.
Thank you so much, Professor Kärkkäinen, for your wonderful introduction. Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are. It's a privilege to be here and to share with you my recent research concerning the holistic wisdom from a Chinese perspective toward a constructive Chinese theology of. And then here's my PowerPoint. I want to start from here. I wish you can see it. My talk will consist of 5 parts. After an introduction, I'll talk about the earliest encounters of Abrahamic faith in China. And then I will study their theologies of creation of the earliest Abrahamic faith in China, especially with the relationship to the spirit or the qi in Chinese concept. And my first part will be toward a constructive Chinese theology, and then I will conclude. First introduction, if philosophy means love of wisdom in the West, then ancient Chinese philosophers love to hear the truth or wen dao. Here, dao refers to truth, the highest wisdom. Chinese civilization has a high regard for wisdom. Professor Wu Kangming, a professor at University of Wisconsin Oshkosh, argues that it is important to probe Chinese wisdom alive today, which is millennium young, as a historic alternative to Western culture, ready to engage in inter-enrichment, end of quote. Whereas the Western culture features alphabetical thinking, which is abstract and digital, the Chinese culture audio-pictographic thinking. The West has logic rationality, while China has music reasoning, shown by their respective ways of writing out their modes of thinking. Against Francis Bacon's motto, knowledge is power, Professor Cao Xing, who is a professor at Chinese University of Political Science and Law, argues that instead of knowledge, wisdom is a real power real source of power. And different peoples have their own unique wisdom, and therefore they can contribute to the wisdom of humanity from different perspectives. For Professor Cao, quote, compared to the wisdom of the West, the wisdom of the Chinese people possesses an inherent peculiarity. The Western philosophers are good at analysis, while the Chinese philosophers do well in intuition. Pure analysis is restricted by attention to detail, while intuition concentrates on holism, end of quote. Hence, Cao proposes that Chinese philosophy is characterized by its intuitive holism. Commenting on the relationship between science and theology, Jürgen Moltmann proposes, quote, a new attempt to see science and theology in the context of the life common to them both, which is made on the level of wisdom, end of quote. For Moltmann, faith and reason can find each other in the house of wisdom they share, and each of them can contribute its own insights to the building of this house in a culture based on wisdom about life. So my paper will explore the house of wisdom constructed in the process of integration of Chinese civilization with the Abrahamic faith in their earliest encounter in ancient China. This paper argues that the holistic wisdom achieved in the early integration process of the Abrahamic faith in China is centered on the spirit or qi, wind or breath, which provides a meaningful ground to construct a contemporary Chinese natural theology. In this paper, I will first examine the earliest the writings found in Chinese that record the life and theology of Islamic, Jewish, and Christian believers. Then the paper will analyze how this faith interact with the Chinese philosophical concept of the spirit. And finally, I will construct a Chinese contemporary theology, which is based on Alister McGrath theology, but mixed up for his spirit deficit. The contribution of this paper lies in its original research into the earliest manuscripts of the three Abrahamic faiths in China from the perspective of the creation theology and its relationship with the spirit. With a newly constructed Chinese theology, I hope to open a door into a meaningful interfaith dialogue and science theology conversation. And with regard to the earliest encounters of Abrahamic faith in China, the Christianity entered China the earliest through the missionary efforts of East Syriac traveler Alopen along the Silk Road in 635 during the Tang dynasty. After its initial success in the next 200 years, Jingjiao, which is the translated Luminous Religion, which is part of the Christianity in China, they suffered a death blow by the Tang Emperor Wuzong in 845 in his campaign of anti-Buddhist persecution. The Xi'an stele, which is translated also as the Nestorian stele, inaccurately, was unearthed in 1623 or 1625 in the Ming Dynasty. The stele was erected in 781 and was inscribed with a text composed by the Church of the East Monk Adam, or Jingjing in Chinese, in both Chinese and Syriac, the discovery of which, quote, caused almost as great a stir in the world of learning at the time as did the discovery of the first Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, end of quote. Other ancient writings related to Jingjiao, written in Chinese, were the Dunhuang manuscripts, which is discovered from 1908 by the French sinologist Paul Palliot to 1943 by the Japanese Kojima Yasushi, and the 815 Luoyang pillar unearthed in 2006. So in sum, we have in our hands a couple of surviving Nestorian writings in the Chinese language. And concerning the time and the route of the Jews' arrival, so those are the earliest the manuscripts related to the Jingjiao. So this is a list compiled by Christoph Baumer, but there are other writings or inscriptions as well, and some are hotly debated as far as their authenticity. And then this is concerning the time and the route of the Jews' arrival at Kaifeng, China. There has been no scholarly consensus. According to John Paper, the Jewish community in Kaifeng, referred to as the Chinese Judaism, arrived at Kaifeng around the year 1000, give or take a few 10 or 20 of years, and lasted approximately 850 years. And no explicit writings on theology by the Jews in Kaifeng have come down to us. Compared to the well-documented histories of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, there is a paucity of documentation on Judaism. Extremely little exists in Chinese records on the Chinese Jews, and Jewish documentation is limited to the stelae that were on the grounds of Kaifeng synagogue, and 4 important stelae have been studied, labeled with the year inscription 1489 and 1512, 1663, and 1679. So here is a diagram of the Kaifeng synagogue drawn by the French missionary in 1722. So eventually here is what we have, these 5 records, including the numerous placards in the worship hall. It is quite good that the Jesuits in the 17th and 18th century were fascinated by the Jews in Kaifeng, and they meticulously recorded these inscriptions, almost all of which were lost in the last major flood. And most of the inscriptions were written by the literati of the Kaifeng community, but a few seem to have been written by the non-Jewish friends of theirs. Regarding their content, Andrew Plux, referring particularly to 1663 stela, opines that, quote, even if some or all of these texts were actually composed on commission by the non-Jewish literati, according to the established Chinese custom of the time, I still maintain that they reflect primarily Jewish input, whether in the form of preliminary drafts or of discussion with the writers, so that they can be taken as evidence of Jewish thinking on various topics. So I will examine the two earliest Kaifeng stela, the 1489 and the 1512 stela, both inscribed in the Ming Dynasty. And the text of the 1489 stela was written by Jingjiao, a Chinese Jew who passed the first level of qualification examination into the official school of the Chinese government. And the text of the 1512 stela was penned by Zuo Tang, also a Chinese Jew, who was a government official. And regarding the exact time when Islam was introduced in China, there have been a few theories. Wang Linggui reviews a few scholarly proposals and suggests that no final consensus can be reached due to the paucity of the historical records in Chinese and other languages. Now, one trustworthy conclusion is that as late as the beginning of the 8th century, missionary activities were accurately recorded. According to Chinese historical record, in the second year of Yunhui Tang Dynasty, the Arabian Empire sent an envoy to establish contact with China. It took hundreds of years for Islam concepts to be expressed systematically in Chinese as religious classics, which appear at the end of the Ming Dynasty. The unique characteristic of the Islamic classics in Chinese marked the real birth of Chinese Islam. The borrowing of Chinese terminologies influences the expression of the Islamic thinking, and more importantly, brings in the interaction between Islam and the Chinese culture represented by Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. This in turn has enriched the Chinese Islamic thinking. Islam has greatly contributed to the Chinese culture. What is noteworthy is the advanced Arabic science and technology in astronomy, medicine, navigation, architecture, and other craftsmanship. The three earliest remaining Islam stela were inscribed in the Yuan Dynasty, which were found here in Quanzhou, Guangzhou, and Jingjiao. Those are the three earliest stela from the Islam. And part 3, I will examine the earliest written records from the three Abrahamic faiths. Regarding the Jingjiao, what I will say is that the Christoph Baumer compares the different situations of the Western Church and the Nestorian missionaries. The Western Church expanded by overcoming the theologically weak religions, such as the Greco-Roman religion, by spreading among the illiterate peoples, for example, the Germania and the British Isles, or by receiving help from the civil authorities. However, the Church of the East, they encountered a highly developed culture and three very vibrant religions, or the worldviews, which were firmly anchored in the state and among the people. While Confucianism provided the state ideology and marked the machinery of society, the Taoism permeated the self-conception of the people and enjoyed the support of the first Tang emperors. And Buddhism, for its part, had reached Chang'an about a half a millennium before Alopen, and adopting elements of Taoism spread rapidly throughout the Middle Kingdom. And Baumer identifies two chief problems or difficulties faced by Alopen and his successors, namely explaining the uniqueness of the Savior Jesus Christ and selecting the target audience, since Buddhists, Taoists, and Confucians could not be addressed with the same concepts. After surveying the existing writings, Baumer characterized the theology of the Church of the East as, quote, a dialogue with Buddhism and Taoism between orthodoxy and syncretism, end of quote, which is very different from the Manichaeism that adapts itself Chamberlain-like to its new environment. Baumer's evaluation does not share the mainstream evaluation that originates from John Foster, who as early as 1939 argues that, quote, terms belong to the other religions are used throughout, the Buddhist being the most important, but it is not syncretism. Rather, it is a borrowing of terminology and the relation of doctrine to a familiar background of thought as the only way of expressing Christian truth in the Far Eastern environment, end of quote. The theological method of Jingjiao is described as, quote, an entirely modern Christian approach to other religions, a method of evangelization based on interreligious dialogue that was virtually unknown in the history of Christian missionary activity in China, end of quote. Their overall theology has been studied and summarized as orthodox. To Matteo Niccolini, their methodology is in-religionization as opposed to inculturation due to their positive view toward other religious vision and practice and occasional adoption of it, end of quote. Their assimilation of Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian terminology is a selective integration, as it was for Christian literature in the languages of Central Asia. Concerning their Christology, Melek argues that their Christian soteriology was formulated within the terminological framework of the Buddhist or Taoist by using the Tao or Buddha model to develop a Buddha Taoist Christology. And so what is of particular interest to this paper and what has escaped the attention of most Jingjiao scholars is their theology of creation in the relationship with the Holy Spirit. So here is a text on the left of the Styla in Steele in 781. On the right is my translation adapted from Niccolini, and also it's my own translations. So here we can see that the first few lines, behold, there is one who is true and firm, prior to every beginning and without origin, as a spirit who is profound, incomprehensible, transparent, and serene, yet ever mysteriously existing to the last of the last, who concentrating his mysterious power creates and transforms all things, a supreme honor being who inspires all holiness. Is this not properly God, the transcendent person of our 3-1, true Lord without origin? Drawing a cross, he separated the 4 areas of space, arousing the primordial spirit. He produced the 2 breath, and then I will skip the next. And from this text, I make a few theological observations. First, Jingjiao's theology of creation is distinctively Christian, and not only so, Trinitarian in its nature, by its use of the language 3-1, cross, which refers to Christ's salvific death on the cross, and the spirit, even though, quote, the Chinese word used here, 造化, is a technical term that refers to a fundamental tenet of Taoist cosmology, end of quote. Point number 2, their theology of creation reflects the creation count in Genesis chapter 1. And third, German to my paper here is Jingjiao's translation of Ruach into a Ling Xu, and his unique reference to the Holy Spirit as Yuan Feng, which is literally the primordial wind that correlates with the Spirit of God, the wind of God, that hovers over the waters in the primordial void in Genesis 1:2. And furthermore, 二气 appears to refer to the yin and yang, which are the constituting elements in Chinese cosmology. Therefore, it can be concluded that Jingjiao closely associates their theology of creation with the Holy Spirit, and it tightly integrates the spirit with the Chinese concept of qi, which can also be translated into wind or breath. Indeed, the author of this stele, Jingjing or Adam, he treats the spirit and the wind synonymously. In line 5, Jingfeng, which is a pure spirit of the 3-1. And then in line 6, Shui Feng, where water and the spirit serve as a means of immersion or baptism required by the Messiah's speaking, and resulting in the humanities being cleansed from vanity and purification to recover their purity and whiteness. And the close association of Feng and the spirit is also attested in other Jingjiao writings. For example, Liang Feng, cold breeze, and Feng Liu, the wind current, in the book of the Lord Messiah, and Jing Feng, the pure wind, in the other writings called the Speakings on the One God, and Jing Feng Wang, the king of the pure wind, in the hymn of praise of the salvation achieved through the three majesties of the luminous teaching. Moreover, Feng, or the wind, or the breath, is so closely tied to Jingjiao's theology to an extent that he combined the word with Jing in line 11. Jing Feng Dongshan, the luminous breeze blew eastward. Nicoli argues that the character Jing means light or luminous that appears here and in other phrases is a reference to Jingjiao, luminous teaching. Semiotically, Tamaki Agawa in Japan traces the phrase Fengjing to the Southern Dynasty, which is in the year 420 to 501, and argues that phrase means light and atmosphere, and that Jing refers to the space and setting in which the light shines in. Therefore, it is reasonable to propose that the name of this Christian sect, Jingjiao, received the name from his high pneumatology, which can be seen by Adam's emphasis on the rule of the spirit in his Theology of Creation, the spirit's production of the two breaths, yin and yang, and its usage of feng, or the wind breath, to refer to the Holy Spirit. So hence, Jingjiao can be rightly translated as the religion of the spirit. After surveying the Jingjiao writings, Liu Zhenying observed the composer's unparalleled preference of the word Jing. For example, Jingjiao refers to the teaching, Jingmen refers to the church, Jingfa refers to the religious ordinances, Jingsi refers to the religious building, Jingzhong to the followers, Jingli refers to their religious power and effect, and so on. And Liu laments that the people can hardly apprehend the name, the Ming of the Jingjiao, let alone its reality, the Shi. Their incomprehensibility partly arises due to the scholars' insensitivity to Jingjiao's pneumatology, and partly due to the obscurity of the writing's transformational deployment of the traditional linguistic features. Moving on to the ancient Jewish text, the Kaifeng text. John Piper points out two factors that moved the Chinese Jews moderately away from the theology that brought from Persia. Number one, their mode of thinking came to be far from the Greek-influenced developments emerging at that time in Islamic, Jewish, for example, Sadia Gaon, Maimonides, and also the Christian theology afterwards, as the Chinese thought is negatively oriented to abstract universals. Therefore, Piper speculates that the Chinese Jews were probably closer to biblical thought than the medieval Christian or Islamic philosophy and theology. And number two, Piper argues that their life experience was very unique from the Jews in the West, who experienced the government condone murder, torture, and expulsion, along with the limits imposed on their right to occupy their own land. The implicit theology of the Chinese Jews would slowly have to come to differ from the developments in Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean, and Mesopotamia, while their ritual life and dedication to the Torah and Talmud remain unchanged. In Piper's estimation, the Jewish theology that developed in China over many centuries, emphasized complementary gender equality in relation to a non-anthropomorphic, non-sexed monotheistic deity who did not exhibit human traits and was therefore neither punitive nor jealous. Chinese Jewish theology did not emphasize separation from a hateful world and was similar to the cosmogonic and cosmological understanding of the larger Chinese culture. Thus, Chinese Jewish theology did not reject this world, but fully embraced it, understanding humans to be part of the nature rather than masters of it. Moreover, its use of the Taoist originated terminology and cosmology, while not essentially, which is not essentially unique from the medieval Jewish theology, with its non-anthropomorphic understanding of deity, may resonate with those contemporary Western Jews who are oriented toward Taoism Buddhism. And from this 1489 stela, here are the text and my translation. The founding ancestor and teacher Abraham of Israel was 19th generation of the descendant of Pangu Adan. Since the opening of heaven and the dividing of the earth, the ancestor and teacher has taught that no images should be molded, no gods and ghosts be worshipped, and no witchcraft be performed. In fact, the gods and ghosts are not useful, images bring no blessings, and witchcraft is of no help. Now contemplate that the heaven is a qi that is light and pure, and the most supreme has no match. The Tao of heaven lies in buyan, practice according to the 4 seasons, and all things will grow. Now observe that things germinate in the spring and grow in summer. People collect the harvest in the autumn and store them in the winter. Those flying and diving, the animals, the plants flourish and decay, blossom and fall down. Those that can be born will be born themselves. Those that can transform will transform themselves. Those that can take shape will shape themselves, and those that are colorful will take on color themselves. Here, pay attention to the 4 themselves. And based on the text, I make a few observations related to the Kaifeng Jews' Theology of Creation. First, the author of the text, Jingjiao, links the Adam in Genesis chapter 1 to the well-known legendary figure Pangu in the ancient Chinese creation myth. Second, the frequent reference to Zu, the ancestor, such as the Zu Shi, ancestor and teacher, and Zu Tong, the tradition of the ancestor, manifest the Kaifeng Jews' assimilation of the ancient Chinese concept of respecting the ancestors. And third, the Chinese Jewish understanding of the creation is associated with the Taoist concept of Tao, Qi, and Buyan. Both the 1489 and 1512 styla translate the Torah as Tao Jing, and therefore confirm that Jewish religion confirms to Tao, which can be seen from its respect of Tao. Such translation is consistent with the Chinese classic Tao Te Ching, which displays a connotation of the Chinese culture in the Kaifeng Jewish religion. Moreover, Ma Baoquan speculates that the translation of Torah to Tao Jing is based on the close pronunciation of Tao in Torah and the Tao in Chinese. And fourth, the word Zi appears 4 times, which indicates the theology's adaptation of the Taoist principle of 自然. Laozi frames the phrase 自然 to affirm the autonomy of all things and to safeguard their self while insisting on Tao as a supreme being in the chain of existence. John Piper observed that, quote, in Chinese cosmology, creation is continuous. The movement from nothingness to somethingness to division into 2 and then the 2 conjoining and creating everything else is continually occurring. And in essence, everything continually creates itself. The Chinese term for this is 自然, which literally means of itself, end of quote. And Piper also observed that including the Analects, 论语, the Kaifeng Jews believed that by the use of 自 or self, the basic understanding came to Abraham as he mediated on Tian, which is God, upon realizing this profound mystery, which is 玄 in Chinese, founded in Judaism. In his speculative theology of the Chinese Jews, Piper proposes that based on their familiarity with the 2 creation accounts of Torah, the Chinese Jews would have more likely to be sympathetic with the first creation count than a second. Quote, removing the willed aspect of creation, this version accords with the Chinese understanding that from the singular Tao arises the male sky and female earth, the female yin and the male yang, which give birth to all existence, including humans, end of quote. So Piper helpfully takes into consideration a Jewish counter-tradition that exists in Israelite popular religion which has been abundantly demonstrated by the last several years of archaeology. The female counterpart of God, Asherah, who is Earth as well as the wife of El. She is the deity of fertility and nurture. Despite its controversial nature in contemporary Jewish scholarship, Pieper argues that such medieval Jewish understanding would not have been antithetical to the Chinese ancient understanding of the splitting of the Tao into complementary pair of sky and earth. His conclusion is that, quote, the differences between the Chinese understanding of creation and understanding that ancestor of Chinese Jews had when they arrived in Kaifeng may not have been strongly pronounced, end of quote. If Pieper is right, then the spirit or qi, which is considered the power of the universe and the vitality of humanity to be united with human bodies to achieve peace and harmony, would be equally crucial for the early Chinese Jews. One of the most important marks of the integration between the Chinese Islam and the Chinese traditional culture is the formation of the Kalam system, which is characterized by interpreting the Islam document with Confucian thoughts. Its formation took a long time, as it was gradually established at the end of the Ming Dynasty and in the beginning of the Qing Dynasty, represented by the initiation of the mosque education and interpretation of the Quran with Confucianism. So here I analyze a text inscribed in 1348 stela, which reads, "Our ancestors have treated all nations as their dwelling places and never stopped doing good. Their foundation of life is to serve the heaven without setting forth any images. The creator cannot be sought after by form and traces." So here I make a few observations and I will conclude. First, the Chinese Muslim theology of creation explicitly acknowledges the creator of the universe, who is invisible and should not be worshipped with any image. Number two, the concept of Tian or heaven is taken out of the Chinese worldview and worshipped as a creator. And therefore, it is no wonder that the Qumran is translated as a Tian Zhi Jing, or the Jing of heaven, or Tian Jing. Later stelae have the frequent references to heaven. The saints preach the Tao on behalf of the heaven on the 1495 stela, and worship to face the west, invoke the heaven, and to celebrate the saints, which is on the 1453 stela, and so on. And Liu Zhi is a typical representative of the Muslim scholar of the Ming and Qing era, who integrates the basic core and essential principle of the Muslim faith and the metaphysical resources of Confucianism. In his Tianfang Xingli, or Koba and Neo-Confucianism, Liu proposes that before the creation of the physical world, there exists an Xiantian Shijie, or an earlier world, whose origin is Wu Cheng. He acknowledges that Taiji, the Taiji in Yi Jing, or the Wu Ji in Zhou Dun Yi's thought, and Tao can be considered as the origin of this physical world. So Liu creatively developed and expanded the Muslim theology of the emergence of the universe with a qi as a constitutive elements. So I have analyzed the earliest stela of the Jingjiao, the Chinese Jew, and the Chinese Muslims that contain the traces of theology of creation. And I have identified their link with the spirit or the qi and the Chinese cosmology. So finally, I will only provide a brief account of my constructive Chinese theology based on Alister McGrath's natural theology. But I have identified that McGrath, he wants to provide a renewed natural theology with the recognition against the predominant view of the Enlightenment, namely that nature refers to an objective reality, which is false. And here, in Chinese Abrahamic faith, nature corresponds to Alister McGrath's understanding against the Enlightenment thinking, especially the ancient Chinese Jewish theology's adoption of the Taoist concept of 自然 joins force with McGrath in refuting the Enlightenment thought. Also, I have identified that in McGrath's theology, there is a lack of the spirit. And I argued that by adopting the rich references to the spirit or qi from the Chinese Abrahamic faith, McGrath's theology can be complemented and also to be brought to my construction of the Chinese natural theology, which will be Trinitarian and especially pneumatological, which will be important for not only interfaith conversation, but also science theology conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was rich, and we feel like we were served a wonderful festal meal. Now, we have about 10 minutes, maybe a few more for Q&A before I invite Professor Openchain to add her closing remarks. And as I communicated via chat function, you may send your questions to the presenter either via chat or by raising your hand and you wish to briefly mention your question. So the floor is now open to comments, observations, and questions, please.
Thank you. Yeah, because of time, I didn't cover all details and findings. Yes, I think the Chinese, the earliest Jews in China, they were so brilliant. They integrated the cosmological viewpoints of the ancient Taoism, and whose interpretation of the nature is not an objective reality, but instead humanity is part of it. Instead of the Enlightenment view of humanity conquering and dominating the nature, for the Chinese worldview, humanity is part of it, and also there is a autonomous going on within the nature, and there is also a self-germinating power within the creation. So in my construction of the theology, I tended to have a conversation with Alister McGrath, who interacted with Augustine's Theology of Creation. He talked about the seed after creation. There is a seed in the creation which can be responsible for self-germination. So I feel that this is very good for theistic evolution conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob, for a most intriguing presentation, because your presentation has several levels that I'm noticing. But I'm going to go to the one that often matters to me most, and that is the term qi. And I'm a careful scholar of Chinese characters and how they show up. Let me double check to make sure I've got it correctly. In the Jewish passage that you gave us to see, I did not see the character qi there. Am I correct?
You are right. Yes.
And I also, and that's fine because you're alluding to it. That's fine. And the same thing with Islam. We don't find the character qi, and that's very important to your presentation. Both of those are not there, but they are there in the Buddhist one. Am I correct there in the ones that you presented? Okay, I'll come back to that, but I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. The qi explicitly occurs in the Jingjiao stela that I presented. But we're not there for the Kaifeng Jews and the earliest Islam stela that I presented. So basically, my understanding is that I'm constructing their theology, also standing on the reconstructed theology. For example, for the Kaifeng Jews, I rely on the John Pieper's book on the Chinese, the theology of the Chinese Jews. And also for the Islam, I also uses Liu Zhi, he's a late Mid-Dynasty Muslim scholar, in his reconstruction of the creation theology for the Islam. So you're right.
Well, my only reason for mentioning that is that I've enjoyed how in your translation you are already doing constructive theology, using the term qi as a link, when in fact that's not showing up in the text. But and that's fine. But you're already engaging in your own, not syncretic, but you're synergizing. You know, you're bringing a certain synergy to all of these things, and I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. And I think your expertise in Chinese culture and philosophies would definitely be of great value. And it did. Thank you. I appreciate your acute observation. Yes, I noticed that trend as well, even though I didn't explicitly state it. That is having to do with the chronology in Chinese history. When the Islam doctrine began to be stated or formulated in a way that is accepted by the public, the Confucianism or the new Confucianism become the dominant ideology in Chinese history. So that is why in the Chinese, among the Chinese Muslim scholars, there is a well-known consensus that the later Muslim scholars, they try to interpret the Islam writings with the Confucian thoughts. However, because of the earliest stages of the Jingjiao and Kaifeng Jews, they rely more on Taoist, but they also relied on the Buddhist thoughts. For example, I didn't have time to elaborate here on this PowerPoint. You can see that this is the Jingjiao stela, and you can see here there is a Nestorian cross, but there is it's placed on the lotus blossom, and the lotus blossom is a famous picture among the Buddhism. And you can see that there is also the sun. There is other symbols. There are also clouds, and the pearl represented yin yang, which is also very important picture images in Taoism. So you can see that it's quite important that they all, in order to survive, all three Abrahamic faith, in unison, they adopted creatively and brilliantly with the Buddhism and Taoist and Confucian thoughts, and and continuing their genuine faith tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Now, in order to do full justice to Professor Diane Openchain, I would like to hand over to you, Diane, and please, your closing and summarizing comments are now in order.
Thank you so much. Jacob, once again, a very intriguing presentation, and you've taken on so much in a very short period of time, and I appreciate how well you've been able to do that. I'm going to summarize some of the points that I found. I want to congratulate you on landing on some very important key concerns that come up for all of us comparative historians of religion. So I'm going to go through your presentation, just summarizing some of the highlights that I found very helpful. One is when you pointed out that it's when these Abrahamic faiths came to China, the only vocabulary they had to use was the Chinese language. And the Chinese language was already engaged in talking about what we call teachings, not necessarily what we would label the modern term religion, but it's jiao rather than zongjiao, and you know this, but they were engaging teachings that were already present there. And their engagement of those teachings does not mean syncretism. It simply means that's the only way they had of doing this. The Buddhists gave a name to this, and it's called ge, matching concepts, right? And you know that, but it's just, you've got to match things up. And then over the hundreds of years that follow that, you fine tune that and find all the ways that they don't match, okay? But there has to be an initial match to get the conversation going. And then after that, you find more and more of the differences that come up. So that was the first. And the second, I did notice that you were interested to link in a way the Jingjiao with Buddhism, the Jewish with the Taoist, and the Muslim with the Confucian, which is a nice bringing together of the main three teachings of China, which are the Buddhist, the Taoist, and the Confucian. And I'm joining there with Julie Scott on her response in that regard. And what's interesting here is that for the Buddhist, the way you brought it out, the Buddhist is concerned with things that are not physical. The Buddhist is concerned with consciousness. And you actually brought forward a teaching from the consciousness-only Buddhist school in the the noticing of your linking then of the Jing with spirit and the consciousness. I thought that was all very well done. And then moving to the Jewish come in and they're focusing on ancestors, the ancestral origin, the Abraham ancestral origin, and linking it then with Pangu, okay, the great ancestor of China. I just wanted to congratulate you on finding that this sort of clanism, and of course, John Paper is always focusing on the family clan system at the root of all things Chinese. So the Chinese bring out the ancestral connection there. Moving on to Islam, I'm thrilled with that, how you brought out the Neo-Confucian concern with investigation of things, physical things in the world. When we hear the word Confucianism, we don't normally think about the investigation of physical things in the world. But by that time, given the Buddhist concern with the non-physical, the Confucians come back with the interest in the physical and finding the principle or the natural law in every single thing. And then I thought that was very interesting with the Islamic connection. Some people have said the Muslims were better at matching the Abrahamic faith than the other two, the Jew and the Christian. And because of that, many have said that's why Islam has survived and been accommodated into the Chinese culture better than the other two. And I thought that was good to kind of bring that out as well. Finally, I love the way you've gone to Alister McGrath and his natural theology, because that's just sitting there waiting for you to come and link this all together as you've done. You're going to have fun, I think, linking the Li in things, the principle in things, and the Tao in things, and going back to the Qi that was there in the first passage. You're going to have great fun linking these three traditions with more of Alister McGrath's work. So I congratulate you on a very interesting and subtle and multi-level presentation in a very short period of time. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor, for doing the same. You were able to distill a lot of observations and comments into a very short and succinct statement. Our time is up, and we have had a wonderful, inspiring hour. I also wish to thank Oxford Interfaith Forum and the moderator, Thea, for her wonderful service, our presenter, our commentator, those of you who raised your questions, and everybody else. I think we all deserve a big applause. And with these words, I bring this wonderful event to a closer. Have a good one. Goodbye.